Hi, my name is Kevin Thomas, W1DED. Today I have with me Sam Malden, W05T. Sam has come well recommended by a number of my friends in the ham radio community. When I looked into his background, it's very interesting. He just got into the hobby in 2022. He took an interest in Parks on the Air right away, CW, and then into contesting. It seems as though his trajectory in ham radio is pretty swift. He's been to Dayton. He's already been on a multi-single contesting trip to Bonaire. And I'm thinking that the future's pretty bright for Sam Malden. Sam, thank you for joining me.
Thanks. It's good to be on here.
So why don't you go back to 2022 and why you got into ham radio? Was it a COVID thing or a family-related thing, or you're just bored?
I think it's a bit of everything. I have had family that's been into ham radio. My father, now known as Norway Oscar 5 Tango, he stole my call sign suffix, but he used to be a ham active and got actually into it after I got back into it, which is nice. But I've also had my grandfather, Kilo 5 November uniform, and a couple other generations before me that have been hams. So they have been asking me to get my license for as long as I can remember. And I've also had a close friend of mine, Kilo Golf 5 Kilo Echo Yankee, in high school that asked me to get my license a bunch. And I thought about it for years and years, and I just never did. But one day I found the time, found a test session, studied, and made it happen.
So once you got licensed, where did you start?
Once I got licensed, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. I live in an apartment, so I couldn't have an antenna at home. So I started to look at how can I operate in the field. And that's when I found out about Parks in the Air and started looking for radios there. At first I thought, I don't really want to learn CW. That doesn't sound very fun. That sounds kind of boring. But I kept looking at it. I was like, okay, this is interesting. If I want a portable radio, I can get one that's cheaper, smaller, I'll get out farther with less power, and it kind of drew me to that. So I started learning CW, ended up getting a KX2 to activate with, and did my first activation not too long after becoming a ham.
Well, I find that really interesting. My trajectory was much the same, although I was first licensed in 1978, but I got relicensed in 2022 and didn't really have an opportunity to set up much of a station here at my home QTH, and discovered Parks on the Air. And I just found that really liberating to be able to go to a park with a bunch of gear that I could throw in my car. And as we were talking about before we got on camera, overcoming the challenges of making sure everything worked, even when you forgot something at home. But you haven't only done a couple activations. I was looking at your Parks on the Air page. You've done over 100 activations. So this seems like an important part of your ham radio operating.
Oh, for sure. I don't think I would have gotten into contesting, into anything else if it hadn't been for Parks in the Air. I mean, for me, it was fun not only to go out and do something. I also just like hiking and outdoors activities in general, so it works well with that. But it's a good avenue to experiment because you're putting up an antenna every time. You can do something a little different. You can see what works, what doesn't. How are conditions on every day that you go out? How is it? What's different? What works? What doesn't? It's a lot of fun.
So tell me more about that. What did work and what didn't work? You've mentioned having a KX2, but what other equipment do you normally use when you're activating a park?
Right. I think my current Go kit is the KX2 and then a DX Commander fan vertical. And what I do with that is just the four main bands that I care about, 10, 15, 20, and 40. I used to have more on there, but I discovered that I did use those, but it wasn't worth the extra setup time. But I still use the KX2 for most activations. If I don't have some space, I'll use a in-fed half wave or something. But everything's a little bit different.
So before the DX Commander, what were you using more typically?
The first antenna I ever had was it was a Pactana in-fed half wave, mostly cut for 20 meters, but it had like a loading coil for 40 towards the end.
So I know people activate parks in different ways. You only need 10 QSOs to have an official activation. Just looking at your records, it doesn't seem like you're the 10 QSO kind of person. It seems though when you set up, you make a number of QSOs.
That's correct. I think I have anywhere from 10 to 700. It's all a little different. Sometimes if I'm just stopping by on a road trip, I'll get the 10 and done. But generally, I like to, spend a bit more time. If I'm camping there, I'll be on the air for a few hours a day, whatever. But I like to get everyone the log. I like being loud, so I usually run a bit more power nowadays, and like to go a little bit faster than the typical CW operation is on POTA nowadays.
Well, tell me about that. How much more power are you running?
500 watts a lot of the time.
That's unusual. We don't often see people parks on the air running 500 watts.
Not very often. I know a few other people that do, but I think about me, and if I set up at a relative's house, I can't really hear very well. And a lot of POTA operators, they have kind of they're running QRP. There's nothing wrong about it, but they're hard to hear. And so if I can be heard by everyone, give everyone a chance to work me, I think that's pretty cool.
So tell me the transition from parks on the air to contesting. Was it going to the park, setting up, running your 500 watts and doing 100 in an hour? Was getting rate at a park part of what you got you hooked on contesting?
Well, I think my first ever contest experience was in the NAQSO party CW, and I was running 5 watts in that, not 500. It was back just a few months after I became a ham, actually, and my rate was not high. I was only doing search and pounce for that first time.
So you got hooked on 5 watts and a low rate. So tell me more about what was appealing about contesting for you.
For me, it was a way to really just stretch my skills, to be uncomfortable by operating and get better, mostly at code, but also just at everything. I mean, right? You have to think about the propagation, where you're going to be, what your strategy is. For the first contest I ever did, I was way below on code speed because I just started, and so you have to listen to every station for a few minutes, hope you catch their call when they send it. If not, wait for the next QSO. But by the very end of the contest, you're like, okay, I can copy some of these on the first try now. I'm getting better, and that's really appealing to me.
So it sounds like you went back out to a park again this past year in January for the North American QSO party, and if I'm looking at the records right, you may have logged somewhere over 1,100 QSOs from a park during a contest.
During the actual contest itself, I think I had just under 1,000 QSOs, but it was on the air a bit before the contest. And for me, that experience was really great. It was like, okay, it's been a year since I've done this first contest. I've done a few other things. How have I improved? And I think I definitely showed myself, okay, there's been a huge amount of progress here. How could I do better next time as well?
So do you think that's going to be something you do more in the future? Actually go to a park, activate a park while doing a contest?
It's interesting. It has a number of challenges, mainly that, the bands like 80 meters and 160 meters are really hard. And I actually didn't really have a setup for either of those for the NAQP. And that's just, you're giving up a lot of score potentially, depending on the contest. A big reason why I'd been out to a park for a contest before is that I didn't have a station to go operate at. And more recently, I've been operating out at George K5TRs. And that's a very excellent station. It's a bit better, a bit louder than being out in the park and setting up something on your own.
Well, I've got to say, I do really appreciate hearing when a ham radio niche intersects with another niche. The Parks on the Air people, hugely successful program, but they sort of do their own thing. Contesters do their own thing, and here you're marrying the two. But it sounds like you discovered a big station with George. I think you've run at least 2 or 3 contests from his station. Is that right?
I have done WPX sideband, NAQP sideband, DX, RL DX CW, and the 160 meter RL contest, but not the whole thing. I think that's all I've done.
And tell me about those experiences.
Well, the very first time I went out to Georgia's station, it was the weekend of the RL 160 meter contest, and I had never made any contacts on 160 meters before. So that was interesting. You know, you go out to the station, you see all the towers, talk about what antennas are there, what is there, and then I end up getting on calling CQ on 160 meters. I think I worked a HB station as the very first ever contact I made on 160 meters calling CQ. And George just looked down at me as like, don't get used to that.
Even though it sounds like code is a passion for you, you just mentioned a couple phone contests, so you're not choosy. You'll do code and phone.
I have a preference for code. I think that's more fun to me, but I also recognize that I do need to actually be good at but both if I want to do things eventually like WRTC or just contesting in general.
So as I mentioned in the intro, your trajectory into ham radio has been a pretty sharp incline. So you start up with Parks on the Air, you learn code, you're running power from a park, you start contesting, you hook up with K5TR and start using his station. But you've also done a multi-single from Bonaire, which for a lot of hams takes them a long time to get on any sort of multi-team. Tell me how that happened.
Actually, that wasn't the first multi-single DX operation I had been on. Previously, with a couple other youth, KC1KUG and W3MLJ, we went out to KP2 for all RLDX sideband. So that was my first multi-single from afar, and I think would be interesting to talk about too. So the three of us planned out a expedition to the Virgin Islands, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and we didn't have any station that we were going to there, but we brought our own gear. We used the DX Commander vertical that I talked about earlier, and we put up some dipoles for some other bands as well. And that was a ton of fun. I think we all learned a lot. Unfortunately, a bunch of us, all three of us, really got sick just before and during the contest. So I think all of us I had a lot of operating time since I was feeling the least bad, but I think all of us were a little disappointed in not getting to, really prove ourselves.
Well, as somebody who has also tried to operate from DX locations, I say tried. I mean, I've learned a lot in the process. What did you learn from the KP2, other than staying well and not getting sick? But what did you learn from an operating and equipment standpoint?
Definitely that preparation is super important. We had planned on putting up a whole spider beam Yagi while we were there, and it ended up that we just didn't have the space to be able to do that. So we had to make a lot of, decisions at the time that we got there that, okay, this isn't quite what we planned, but we're going to make it work. So it's, some practice of improvising. We had a great location there that we planned for, which worked out really well that I'm happy with. So location is definitely something that's super important. You have to get along. That's true before the operation while you're putting together antennas. If you don't get along very well, it's not going to be fun. But if you do get along well, then you can figure things out. So we got along well. We figured out the antenna stuff, and we were able to get on the air. Even it wasn't the full thing we had planned, but we made it happen.
So when you went to Bonaire, Sam, did you go to an existing station, or did you bring gear with you again?
So this time we went to an existing station. It was the PJ4G station on Bonaire, which has a couple tri-banders, I think a 2-element on 40, and then wires for the low bands. But we did bring our own radios and a lot of equipment in the shack.
So do you see many more DX trips in the future where you bring your own gear, or will you in the future look for existing stations?
I think if I'm going to somewhere that already has an existing station, I would much rather do that than have to carry everything through the air. But if I'm going to some, rare DX entity that doesn't have a station already there, I think I'm quite open to bringing stuff, but it makes things more complicated.
Well, I'm certainly at that juncture myself. I've been carrying around two 60-pound Pelican cases to locations like St. Vincent a couple times, to Bahamas, to Virgin Gorda, and it's a lot of work. And just trying to figure out things when you're there, it's like going to a park in the U.S., but now you're 1,000 miles from home, so you have to deal with what you have. I am going to try a trip next year where I'm actually using the existing station, and I feel so spoiled that I'm able to do that and not take gear with me. I may take a backup K3, but It's going to be great to get off the plane without all that luggage and have a station that's already been vetted and ready to go in the air. It's probably going to also take a little bit of the fun out of it, frankly. Even though I say it's a little frustrating to haul the gear around, it is fun to be able to set up and problem solve, as we talked earlier.
Right, and I think you have to think about a lot of those same trade-offs when you're doing parks in the air. Okay, I can run 500 watts, but that means now I have to carry 50 pounds of stuff down the stairs, and I have to have an antenna that can handle it, and it takes a lot more time to get everything plugged in.
Obviously you're a lot younger than I am. This is a hobby where people often note that most of the participants are older, that we may be having trouble attracting young ham radio operators, which I'm not sure that is entirely true because I've talked to a lot of younger operators. But what do you see as the challenges facing ham radio in the years ahead, particularly when it comes to a younger generation getting involved?
I think there actually are quite a few young people that are interested in the hobby and that take some effort to get into it. I think the biggest challenge that people face is just how do you get on the air? You can get your license, but if you're at an apartment, you're still living with your parents, maybe you're not really able to put up an antenna. So you're going to be pretty limited in the ways that you can engage in the hobby. There are some programs I see working to try and address that. So if you can operate a station remotely, that's a great way to get on the air, but it's not quite the same. You don't get the same experience of getting to build your own antenna, try to figure out how everything works, troubleshooting. So that's an option. Or the other option I see people do a lot is go portable parks in the air. And I think the big barrier for people younger than me would be finding the time to do that and finding the money, because HF equipment it's not cheap.
Well, I'd also add it's somewhat confusing. So it's not cheap, but it's also difficult to know where to invest your money. The good thing about ham radio, I believe there's a lot of good used equipment on the market. But I found myself early on when I got relicensed and trying to get a portable kit together, I really wasn't sure what to buy. And I made some mistakes. And when I made those mistakes, that ended up being multiple antennas that I don't use now in my basement and and other miscellaneous pieces of gear. So, I think you're right. I think that the portable operating is probably a entry point for young people. It's probably less expensive, but you're also bringing up a good point that there probably needs to be some advice on how to get into it economically.
Whenever I was first starting, I remember the same thing of there's not really a good starting point as far as what do you need to buy to get started. And part of that is because there's so many trade-offs to be made. It's so unique of what you want to do. And I remember watching and reading a lot of the Cure Peer blog by K4SWL, and he talks a lot about field radios, antennas, and that was a good resource for me when I was getting started on, okay, what do you need? What does an activation actually look like?
So what do you think the future of ham radio looks like?
I think the future of ham radio is continuing to push the boundaries of existing activities like has happened in the past. So in contesting, you do innovations like, okay, now 2BSIQ is a big thing. What's next? How can we push the boundary next? For parks in the air, we didn't have a whole lot of activity like that before, but now we do. It's still the same ham radio operating, but you can push the envelope a little bit. Things like the Contest Online scoreboard come to mind.
So Sam, you're a software engineer, and from what I can tell, you're a very successful software engineer. I've read the accolades on LinkedIn. Very impressive, by the way. So as a software engineer, how do you think some of the new technologies on the horizon are going to impact ham radio potentially over the next 5, 10, 20 years?
Well, thank you for one, but I think there is still a lot of innovation that can happen on the software front. For one of the barriers I see for people getting into contesting is what logging software do you choose? And there are a lot of good options, but there's not necessarily one default for everyone. So, there's a good recommendation on Windows. Everyone uses N1MM, but that can be a little tricky to get into. And on Mac and Linux, there are good logger options as well, but there's not. They're all a bit off the beaten path. So for me, one of the things I see people get hung up on is whenever they start going into contesting, they have a lot of trouble setting up a logger, and maybe we could make that a more streamlined process.
What do you think about AI? How will AI impact ham radio in the future?
For me, one of the things that I like about ham radio is kind of that it is a more, old style analog communication method. So if I'm talking to someone, I'm not talking to an AI, I'm talking to a human on the other end. And that's really appealing to me in an age where I might email a coworker and get back a AI response. That's not to say AI can't be used, but I think one of the appeals is that it's different. It is modern, but it's also an older style of things.
So I think what I hear from that is, even though AI could possibly be used with ham radio, we should lean on the analog part. We should lean on the tradition a little bit more than the AI technology advancement.
I think that's my personal preference. I think that preference is also reflected in that I don't really do a lot of FT8 operating. I don't have a problem with it, but it's not for me. I like the older, obviously Morse code, and just it's personal.
So Sam, you've been to Dayton and you've obviously gone on these trips. So you're well aware of the, I would even say, worldwide ham radio community. Do you have any observations about how that community operates and how it could operate more successfully to attract more ham radio operators?
I've actually been quite surprised at how friendly a lot of the people are. Like when I go to Dayton, I can name every young person at Dayton, and I got to talk to every single one of them. But, you could go up to anyone and they'd be friendly to talk to. And I don't think there was anything really off-putting to me about that. It felt very friendly and inviting. As far as what they could do more, clearly the Contest University at Dayton was very successful. They're very busy and attracted a lot of people. Maybe there could be more events like that on how do you get into ham radio? And that could be something that could happen at a local club meeting or a local club ham fest.
Well, Sam, I appreciate you taking time this morning to talk to me. And I do, speaking of going to Dayton, I hope we can meet in the future, either at Dayton or Visalia or one of the events that are somewhat proliferate in the ham radio world. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
I've been talking to Sam Malden, WO5T. I'm sure you'll hear him on the air, either from a park or during a contest. Have a great day.